On June the 22nd, the Golden State Warriors shocked the NBA by trading 24-year-old Jordan Poole in exchange for 38-year-old Chris Paul. Well, 5 days later, and I'm here to tell you, the Warriors might have made the right decision. Before we talk about anything else, we need to actually talk about who Chris Paul is as a player, because it's almost like that has been completely forgotten. Yes, I know he's really old, but he's still pretty damn good. I mean, how many players are making plays like this? Here's CP3 bringing the ball up the floor. Ayton sets the screen, CP3 rejects that screen before splitting the double and getting straight to the rim. Or how about this play where he's got Cat on an island? He crosses him up, steps back, and whilst stepping back, he drops a dime to a cutting Mikal Bridges. It's more than just the highlight plays though. Last year, Chris Paul averaged 14 points and 9 assists, which sounds pretty damn solid, but it's the way in which he put up those numbers that is quite special. Over the course of NBA history, there has only been 3 times where a player has averaged at least 8.9 assists and less than 2 turnovers per game. Muggsy Bogues did it twice, and Chris Paul just did it this season. And this is very important for one particular reason. The Dubs had huge turnover issues this season. I mean, I'm still a big fan of Jordan Poole, but some of the turnovers we saw from him were frustrating to say the least. I mean, how many times can you slip over? I don't understand how it kept happening. But just to give you the numbers, this season the Warriors ranked dead last in the regular season for turnovers and 4th last in the playoffs. Just to put things into perspective, for Jordan Poole to average 9 assists per game, like Chris Paul did this year, he would turn the ball over on average 6 times in the process. That's an extra 4 possessions for the opposition. And let me make it clear, this is not slandering JP, who I think could still be a very special player. The reality is, he's still got a lot of room to improve. CP3, despite being old, is one of the most reliable offensive players in the league when healthy. I mean, he had 52 assists to 7 turnovers in the postseason. That is insanely good. And don't just take my word for it. Steve Kerr seems to think this trade was necessary as well. We're going to be a lot different. The biggest point is that we sensed we needed a shift. Didn't mean we needed an overhaul, but we needed a shift of some sort. I think everybody in the organization sensed that, and it feels like we've made a pretty significant shift without giving up our identity and our sense of who we are as a team. Now, I believe Steve is talking about more than just on the court stuff, with some clear locker room issues this season. However, even just looking on the floor strictly, the Dubs have had one issue that they needed to address more than any other issue. It wasn't the wing depth, it wasn't a backup big. The biggest issue was whenever Steph Curry sat on the bench. I mentioned this before, but this is everything to the Warriors. With Steph Curry on the floor, the Golden State Warriors had a 120 offensive rating in the regular season, which would have been good for first. With him off the floor, that rating dropped all the way to 24th in the league, and it got even worse in the playoffs. In 130 minutes without Steph Curry on the floor, the Warriors had a 96 offensive rating in the playoffs, which would have been 5 points worse than the Cavs, who lost in the first round in 5 games. A 20-point swing. I don't care if CP3 is 50 years old. They will never have an offense that bad with him on the floor. In fact, the Suns were 8 points better with CP on the floor in this year's playoffs than with him off it. And that's because he's still an elite facilitator. I mean, just watch this play. Ayton sets a pick for Chris Paul out top, and just watch CP bait every single Pels defender before looking off Najee Marshall and hitting Book in the corner for a wide open 3. Or how about this play where again, it's a pick and roll, and look at how perfectly CP3 hits Book in the corner on the skip pass. How many players in the league can make a play like that? I guarantee not a single one of them is coming off the bench. But do you know why I showed you those 2 plays in particular? How about you replace Devin Booker with Klay Thompson? 90% of Klay's threes are assisted, so having CP3 throw those skip passes to the corner or give it to Klay on the move could be so dangerous. And I think this is where the Dubs can really take advantage. If they can successfully stagger Paul with Klay and then Steph with Dre, you minimize the weaknesses of Klay and Dre, but maximize their strengths. Klay isn't the only guy that needs to be maximized either. Jonathan Kuminga is entering a make or break season. And And it's easy to forget because JK is only 6'7". Yes, Kendrick Perkins, he's not actually 7'2", but it's easy to forget that he operates primarily as a dunker and does a lot of his work in the pick and roll. And whilst you'd like to see more out of him, this is another area where the Warriors could supercharge an off-the-ball player with the playmaking of Paul without just having to pray that Steph draws 3 defenders on every possession. It's not just Kuminga either. It's Moody as well that the Warriors will hope Chris Paul can guide and add experience to. Because what do you guys remember about last year's championship team? They were seasoned veterans off the bench. Aside from JP, Belly, GP2, Otto, and Iggy, the youngest of which was Otto at 28. And these were the guys that were willing to sacrifice for the team and, more importantly, didn't make big mistakes. The Warriors could now have that with CP3, GP2, and hopefully one of or both Moody and Kuminga alongside someone they pick up in free agency. And with that being said, the Warriors should immediately become a good bench. Just to put CP3's numbers into perspective, right here are the top 4 vote getters from this year's Sixth Man of the Year award. Now yes, CP3 played a few extra minutes, but even on a minute-to-minute basis, the playmaking is so far ahead of anyone coming off the bench, it's not even funny. In fact, you'd be hard-pressed to find anyone who's a better playmaker than Chris Paul that isn't the number 1 option on a team, and they've got him coming off the bench. But there might be more to this trade than meets the eye. Do you want to guess who had the best starting lineup in the NBA this year? It wasn't the Milwaukee Bucks or the Denver Nuggets. It was the Golden State Warriors. Yes, again. And financially, with Jordan Poole signed to a long-term deal, it was becoming close to impossible for the Warriors to then re-sign Draymond and Klay over the next 2 years. And this is where this trade could be genius, because for this season, there was no better player you could get than Chris Paul. However, the Warriors will then have the opportunity to shed that salary next year or re-sign him cheaper if things work out. Essentially, it's a free hit. And yes, the price could be huge because JP could be a star, but we haven't seen anything to suggest he could be a star coming off the bench, which is where he would have had to start this season. Now, just in case you still aren't convinced, I want to go back to last year. Yes, I know age is a factor, and maybe this is who he is now, but if you remember back to last year, at 36 years old, Chris Paul was considered one of the 20 best players in the NBA. He averaged 18 and 8 in the playoffs on crazy efficiency, and that included an all-time performance against New Orleans, where he dropped, wait for it, 33 points and 8 assists on 14 of 14 shooting. 100% shooting as a 6-foot guard. And this is what makes the Dubs so dangerous, is they don't need that from him every single night. But if he does have it going, and I guarantee there will be a game where he has it going, there's no reason he can't play 35 minutes in that said game and be the best player on the floor. That's what you could potentially be getting. Anyways, at the very least, I think this trade makes the Warriors better this year, and with Steph Curry at 35 years of age, that's all you really need to be worried about.